Good evening, everyone. It's good to be with you tonight. And Amy, thank you for your leadership in our annual conference and your good work with our conference trustees. We are grateful for all that you all do to help us steward well the property of the annual conference and our local churches. I want to just touch on a couple of kind of foundational things to remind us all that the mission that we're about is not buildings and property, but and sometimes we can get we can be so focused in our work, our particular ministry area in the local church or even in the district or the conference, that we forget that that is the work that we do is a part of advancing the mission. So the mission of the church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. We exist, the church, to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. That is our mission. That is our reason for being. And it is behind and should undergird all that we do, even the work of the trustees, and maybe especially the work of the trustees. Okay, Amy? Because the mission of the board of trustees in a local church and at the annual conference level is to help the local church to fulfill its mission to the community and to the world by supervising, maintaining all the property belonging to the congregation so that the ministries of the congregation may be effective. So notice how that's worded. Our mission as trustees is to help the local church fulfill its mission. And so we have no other mission other than the mission of the church, which is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And our role is to help our local churches as trustees do that to their fullest potential so that they can be fruitful and vital disciple-making communities. And how this relates to property then, the stuff that the church owns, our facilities, our buildings, our real estate, is that it's important that the work of the board of trustees, it is the important work, of the board of trustees to ensure that the congregation is a good steward of what previous generations have made available to them. So that's part of our role in managing, stewarding the property of the church, that we'll be good stewards of all the faithful saints who've come before us have left for the church to carry out its mission. So that's first. Secondly, the board of trustees cannot and should not ever interfere in the ministry program of the church, even if it means the buildings will be used and in a sense worn out. We could use some more worn out church buildings, not worn out because we haven't cared for them, but worn out because they're so full of vital ministry that we're using them up, which is the purpose for having the buildings in the first place. And finally, the ministry of the board of trustees is to help provide a safe, clean, well-maintained environment in which people may come and work together to serve Christ and to make disciples of Jesus Christ. So in other words, we provide the buildings, we help to care for them, steward them as so that they can be used as an essential tool in our disciple-making and world-transforming work in our mission. The buildings aren't the end. Our property is not the end. Our buildings and our property and our other physical resources are a means to the end, which is fulfilling the mission that's been given us as the Church of Jesus Christ. There you go. It is a tool. Thanks, Amy, that enables the local church to fulfill its mission and vision to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And if we can keep that in mind, we're going to be excellent boards of trustees.
Amen. So now let's think a little bit about the organization of the Board of Trustees. You'll find the organization in the Book of Discipline, and I do recommend that every chair of the Board of Trustees have a Book of Discipline, because there's lots of important information in there, and lots of procedures that you can follow, and things that you can find out. But in paragraphs 2525 and 2526, we learn about the organization of the trustees. The board is composed of no more than 9 and no fewer than 3 members. So, you have a wide variety there, but no fewer than 3. And I think you need more than that because of the amount of work and the amount of things that have to happen, but no more than 9 trustees. They have to be at least 1/3 lay women, 1/3 lay men, and then the last third can be anything you want. But this provides a good representation. As Christians, as United Methodists, we want to celebrate and welcome the diversity in our mix. And so the organization makes sure, as it lays out the organization of the trustees, that we do have both men and women on this group, because both are needed and both are important. 2/3 of the trustees must be professing members. Now, that's kind of interesting, because in most other committees, the staff parish committee, everybody has to be a member of the local church in order to serve. But with the trustees, at least 2/3 must be professing members. Local churches may choose to do something differently, but what the discipline requires is that at least 2/3 are members of the church. And they're divided into 3 classes, with 1/3 elected every year. And what that does is it provides a wonderful rotation of people that have been experienced and have been a part of the trustees for either 1 or 2 years, as well as new people, new voices, new folks that can come and add their ideas and add their gifts and their grace as they come together and as we take care of stewarding the wonderful gifts that God has given to us. The nominations for the trustees are nominated by the Nominations and Leadership Development Committee, and they are elected by the Charge Conference. I think that the Nominations and Leadership Development Committee is one of the most important committees in the local church, because they're charged with looking at the various gifts that people have and helping people to use their gifts in service to the church and in service to the world. And so they get together and they nominate people in order to be trustees, and then they must be elected by the Charge Conference. One of the things about trustees is that they are the legal representatives of the local church. And so while if there's somebody has to resign or somebody moves away and you have to fill an opening of another committee, most other committees that can be done in your church council meetings. But for trustees, it's got to be done in an official business meeting in the Charge Conference of the church. And so if you need to replace trustees, you need to ask the district superintendent for a special charge conference in order to do that. Trustees must be of legal age as determined by law. And again, that's because they're the legal representatives of the local church. And so they must be able to sign documents and be able to make decisions for the church. So they must be of legal age. The pastor is a member of the Board of Trustees, and they're a member without vote, unless for some reason the Board of Trustees elects the pastor as a member. Now, friends, that rarely happens because pastors have lots to do, and there are enough people in a local church that there can be 9 trustees or 6 trustees or 3 trustees, but the pastor should be at those meetings because the pastor can help guide some of the processes, as well as just help the trustees think about priorities and what needs to be done. The church treasurer can also serve on the Board of Trustees. However, she or he has a voice but no vote. They're not a voting member, but they can be there as they think through the money and as they think through the funds available to do the things that need to be done. They can provide their voice, but they don't have a vote. And then finally, the members of the Board of Trustees elect their own officers. They're the only committee that does that. And so in their first meeting in January, they're called together by the pastor, and they're called to elect a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary. it's really important that they elect a vice chair, because there may be times when the chair is out of town or maybe is ill and the trustees need to meet. And so the vice chair is someone who would run the meeting. And then the secretary plays a crucial role in that they keep the minutes of the Board of Trustees. And those minutes need to be kept and need to be passed down from chair to chair so that we have records of what needs to, what's been done and how long ago it was done, and so that there are records in case a warranty needs to be checked on or something like that. So the secretary serves an important role in keeping the minutes and the records of what's happening to the physical plant, to the buildings and the property of the church. And let me remind you that the Board of Trustees elect their chair, vice chair, and secretary every year. So each January, they need to come together and have that election. Doesn't mean that the chair can't be a chair for 2 years, but they do have to come together and elect those officers. And my hope would be is that as you do that you might elect a vice chair that can then succeed the chair in the next year or in the next 2 years. That person can be in training and can be mentored, so they're ready to take over and give great and faithful leadership to the Board of Trustees. Now, once we've gotten the group organized, the last one is that they should meet at least quarterly. But I will be honest that most boards of trustees that meet quarterly end up with having 3-hour meetings. So meet as often as you need to so that your meetings aren't super long, but so that the work that needs to be done in order to steward the property is done in a timely fashion, and you can hold each other accountable and you can do what needs to be done. So here are your responsibilities. Again, looking at the Book of Discipline, you'll find those in paragraph 2533 of the Book of Discipline. And the first, as we've already mentioned, the first responsibility is to oversee and maintain and supervise all local church property. And what that includes is conducting an annual inspection and an inventory of all the church property, including the parsonage. Now, I know that there are some churches that have a parsonage committee. And in actuality, that parsonage committee is a subcommittee of the Board of Trustees, because the Board of Trustees oversees and maintains the parsonage, and they're guided by the parsonage committee. But if you don't have a parsonage committee, then it's the trustees' responsibility to keep watch over that parsonage. And once a year, the discipline asks that the member of the staff parish, a member of the parsonage committee, if there is one, the chair of the Board of Trustees, and the pastor walk through that parsonage as you have one, so that too can be maintained at the same level that you maintain your church buildings and church property. You also are, one of your responsibilities is to report annually to the charge conference the state of the church property, its equipment, its investment, and resources. In short, this is the report of the trustees that is completed and given at charge conference. And it's just not a piece of paper to fill out, but it really lists the officers of the trustees. It talks about the insurance amounts. It lets people know where the deeds can be found and where how the investments are doing. So this is an important report that you give to the whole church that lets them know how that this tool that they're using to do ministry is doing. The Board of Trustees is also responsible for receiving and administering all gifts that are made to the congregation. They need to make sure that if a trust fund is left to the congregation, that's invested properly. They develop guidelines for receiving and managing wills and trusts and bequests and other investments that are given to the church. And so those are important, and it's important when someone passes away and maybe leaves part of their estate or leaves a piece of property to the trustees, that there are guidelines in place so that the trustees know what to do with that property. And so again, what's given to the church can again be used in ministry in the church. And if you have questions about that, we're glad to help you. And also, our United Methodist Foundation is a wonderful resource in helping you develop guidelines and know where and how to invest funds in ways that are faithful and will help in perpetuity to provide resources for your local church. Another responsibility is to ensure that the articles of incorporation and that the minutes of the incorporation of the congregation are kept up to date. There are some churches that have chosen to become incorporated, and that is one way that you can protect some of your church members, particularly the trustees, in the case that the church was sued because of negligence or because of something else that maybe happened on the property. But the important thing about being incorporated is that then you have to act like a corporation. It does no good to become incorporated and file articles of incorporation with the state of North Carolina and then never do what corporations are supposed to do, never keep meetings, never hold the annual meeting of the corporation, never transfer the church property into the name of the corporation. If there were to be a suit against the local church, what would happen then is the courts would look at that and say, well, you say you're a corporation, but you certainly haven't been acting as one. And so it's important that if a church has chosen to become incorporated, and that's a choice that the church makes, that you do act like a corporation, that you have that annual meeting, that you keep the minutes, and that you do the things that corporations do. As we post resources for this workshop, we will be glad to be putting up a local church incorporation handbook in those resources. And that's a wonderful guide that talks about articles of incorporation if you haven't been incorporated and want to do so, but it also gives you some guidance about how to operate as a corporation as well. Next, the Board of Trustees is responsible in conjunction with the pastor for all use of the church buildings and grounds. Responsible for making sure that they're safe, that they're ready to be used for ministry, that they're used for their purpose. And you do that in conjunction with the pastor, in tandem with the pastor, as you work together to allow the buildings and the grounds to be the tool that God needs for them to be as you go about ministry. There's no acting of the Board of Trustees in isolation, but you work together with the pastor in order to do that work. And it's a responsibility of the Board of Trustees to maintain adequate insurance coverage on all church property and to develop appropriate risk management properties. In the annual report of the church trustees that's filled out at charge conferences every year, we give a list of the minimum insurance requirements that are recommended by our denomination that a church would have. And for many years, we've talked about how important it is that not only do you have property and liability insurance, but that you also have sexual misconduct insurance. And a lot of policies have separated this out. And so it's important for trustees on a yearly basis to review the insurance coverage, to compare that to what our denomination recommends as minimum insurance coverage, and then to talk about that with your insurer to make sure that you are adequately covered. There's nothing worse than having a church fire and realizing that your insurance is inadequate for replacing what needs to be replaced and rebuilding the sanctuary. And so the trustees can help the church in this way to make sure they have the insurance coverage that they need. They're also responsible for keeping a budget and submitting to the Committee on Finance the amount of money that they need in order to do their work. The request for insurance, for property maintenance, for improvement, for new property purchases. And the trustees make this request to the Finance Committee so that the Finance Committee can incorporate that into their budget, and then that can be approved by the charge conference. Again, the trustees don't act in isolation or in autonomy, but they are accountable to both the charge conference and the church council. As those two bodies choose what's being done in the life of the church, the trustees work to help make that happen. If they need to make sure that the grass is mowed for a particular service, or that there's maybe a deeper well so that you can have water for the dinners that your church has been providing, then it's the trustees that work hard to make sure that that happens so that ministry can happen. And finally, the responsibility of the trustees is to execute all contracts, including those with cleaning and lawn care services. Again, you are the legal entity of the local church, which means you need to be the ones that sign the contracts. Sometimes churches have a contract with a lawn care service, and so it would be the trustees that sign that. Or sometimes you contract with a cleaning company like we do here at the conference office. And again, it would be the trustees that sign that contract. Now, interestingly, our book of discipline talks about how all employees of the church and even contract people are supervised by the staff parish committee, but they can work in tandem with the trustees in supervising things that have to do with the building. And so one of the things that I suggest is that you ask your pastor parish committee, your staff parish committee, to allow the trustees to be the ones that supervise the lawn care services and be the ones that supervise the cleaning. And that way you all can make sure that things are being done in the way that you want them to be done, and you don't have to work through that middle person, but you've got to have their permission, and you've got to work with them as you do that. We will have time for questions and answers. I know this is a lot, but we'll have time for questions and answers after at the end of the presentation. So we want to now move to property. It's probably the biggest thing that you all have to deal with, and the trustees again hold title to all local church property on behalf of the United Methodist Church. You hold it in trust for the United Methodist Church, that property. And so there's some ways that we as Methodists do things when it comes to church property. Purchasing property, mortgaging property requires the approval of not only the pastor, but the district superintendent, a committee called the District Committee on Church Location and Building, and the charge conference. Because as we're holding that property in trust for the United Methodist Church, we want to make the best decisions. And so oftentimes it's really important to have other voices that have experience and different knowledge to weigh in as you think about purchasing a piece of property or selling a piece of property, or maybe building a new sanctuary or another new building, or about ways that you can use your building in different ways. And so these folks work in tandem as a part of our connectional system in order to help us all be the best stewards and use the property to its fullest. So this again is where the book of discipline comes into handy, because the discipline gives specific steps that need to be followed depending on what you want to do. And your district superintendent will be glad to share with you what paragraph or what you need to look for, and so that you can follow those steps as you need to. Also with us tonight is Joel Gilland. Joel is president and CEO of Wesley Community Development. They're located right next door to us in the building that's also occupied by the United Methodist Foundation. And Joel works closely with us in the conference with our properties all across the conference with closed churches. But he also works a lot with local churches and how to use their properties to their fullest. So I've asked Joel to be with us, and he's going to share with you a little bit more about Wesley Community Development.
Thank you, Amy, and hello, everyone. You can all shout back hello. I won't be able to hear it, but that's okay. You're muted. I'm about to tell you something that you probably have never heard in a trustee meeting, and that is this may be the most exciting year to be a trustee of the United Methodist Church. Now, raise your hand if you've heard that before. Reason I say that is it goes back to a lot of what David said and Amy said. Our buildings and our campuses are tools. They are not the church. They're tools for the church. And the fact that COVID has distanced us from those buildings for so long, people are beginning to come to that realization. They're beginning to see the building differently. They're beginning to see some of the weaknesses and some of the possibilities. And so as we return after COVID, I think we have a golden opportunity to rethink some of our space. At Wesley, we like to say that our job is to get the building out of the way of ministry. So we have buildings that were built many years ago, and maybe there's some tweaks that need to be made. I think that when we heard in my house are many rooms, we thought that was a design prospect, and so we built a lot of rooms, small rooms in our churches. That's not what we need right now. So you're going to have a real good opportunity to take a look at new things. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about Wesley, because I think we're here as a tool to you if you need us. We are a nonprofit. Thanks, Amy. I can go to the next one. We're a nonprofit. We were actually born out of the Western North County Conference. In 2002, the Duke Endowment gave $2 million to the conference and said, build affordable housing. And the conference's response was to create Wesley. And for the first number of years of our existence, we built single family homes. We built 85 of them, did the credit counseling, et cetera. We were kind of like the Habitat for Humanity Methodist version. We shifted during the recession to the tax credit projects. We have done 8 of those. We're getting ready to build the 9th. So these are 70 to 80 units at a time for senior or family housing. And we have a total portfolio of over 1,000 units that providing housing for folks who wouldn't have it otherwise. Amy. We try to do everything we do with quality. We are the only company, profit or nonprofit, in the state of North Carolina that's won best in class in single family, supportive, and multifamily. So again, we try to do it right, and just as you do on your projects. Amy. In 2015, we started a class called Seeds of Change. Now, this is pre-COVID. Obviously, we're not doing it right now. Where we would bring in 8 churches at a time, 1 pastor, 3 laity, to talk about our buildings. So we're using our campuses on average 12%. If you were a business and you were using your buildings at 12%, you would no longer be in business. And it's not good stewardship. So we start talking about how can we use our campuses to better connect with community. We talk about makerspace, hackerspace, talk about co-working space, a lot of ideas telling you that we don't have the silver bullet. What we do want you to walk away is thinking about your buildings and your campuses differently, thinking about possibilities. If there's a tutorer sitting in a McDonald's with 4 kids every afternoon trying to tutor in there, and you've got an empty room in your building, then there's a disconnect. So maybe that connection strengthens the church and strengthens the community, and those opportunities are out there. So we spend time talking about that, and once COVID is gone away, we'll return to doing that program. Next thing. We also, since 2019 or so, have started doing consulting. We consult with churches about their property, about options, about any real estate issues. I'm a real estate guy. I'm a building guy. So I'm the preacher's kid who didn't go to seminary. I did buildings instead. Next. We also are in development of properties, redevelopment and development of churches and other uses of that property. We've developed just under $70 million since our inception, and by early 22, I think we'll exceed the $100 million mark. We're also a fully licensed brokerage firm. So if there's buying, selling, leasing, we do that as well. Since 2000, we became a brokerage firm in May of 2019. We've brokered 20 properties for about $8.2 million in transactions. And we were extremely proud and appreciative of the trustees of the conference to allow us to develop the new conference center. The interesting thing that I saw when I was sitting on the stage and you guys were all voting on whether or not to allow the new conference center to be built was the younger people who came to the microphones and said, we want it to be green. Well, that's the generation that we're trying to reach, and that's an important statement. Now, the truth is, with building codes, most buildings that will be built now are green, but you can do more. So we came back and redesigned and took this building to a LEED Gold status. Only the second building in North Carolina to get LEED Gold under the new version 4. We also did a net metering solar project. So the solar power that's generated is serving the conference floor. We also did one other thing. We built twice what the conference needed, and we leased the first floor. The days of building our church buildings and passing the plate to pay for them are getting thin. And so we wanted this building to make a statement, and make a statement about creation care, make a statement about being strong, fiduciary, responsible, and I think we've accomplished that. And in 2019, we took over the management of the assets of the conference, which kind of completed the circle that everybody touching buildings in the conference has something to do with the church. Again, we're a nonprofit, we're a part of the church. And so when we look at your churches or the conference's assets, our first priority is to look at them from the perspective of how do we strengthen the church? How do we grow the church? How do we care for the church? So to date, since 2019, this has been the activity. You'll notice the green on number 9, or 9 encumbrances. So part of what Amy was talking about, especially with the secretary, is the trustees understanding their property and understanding how that property may be encumbered. Almost 10% of the properties that we've looked at, generally through the closure process, but also through the active process, have got encumbrances, easements, some cloud on the title that nobody knew about, the trustees didn't know about. We have a church right now in Greensboro that is looking to potentially sell its campus and move to a campus that's closer to where its congregation is. There's an AT&T easement going straight down the middle of that site that nobody knew about, and it goes back to, if those of you remember, before AT&T got split up. Now, to find the person who can help you get that easement dismissed or moved after this amount of time, it's without the documentation, is highly challenging. So we have driveways that exist on our property, or our driveways exist on somebody else's property, been there for a long time. But when you come to do a transaction with your real estate, it makes a big difference. So it's really the documentation and keeping any agreements, any easements, is incredibly important for the long term. And it may not seem important to you today, but somebody 20 years from now is going to be really glad you did it well. Deferred maintenance is the second biggest issue we find. And I will tell you that water is number 1 on the list. Deferred maintenance is running on a credit card. It's not going to get cheaper. These are actual churches that we have taken over. These are what we have found. Water intrusion, the minute you see even a thought of it, chase it. Because by the time you realize that a lot of times the damage is already done. And it is by far, Mac, who works in my office, and I, who go and walk and inspect our properties in Glen, carry a moisture meter with us to measure the water content of the walls. It's become that big of an issue. So, when we took this role, what we believe is that we're a connectional church, and that if we pass best ideas and best practices together and we work together, we can all strengthen what we do. So we want to understand what is the actual portfolio of the Northwestern North Carolina Conference. So the only way to do that, you guys fill out your reports, but there isn't a master report. So we went out to every county tax record or county tax office and did the research to discover what the portfolio of the conference was. So we put it onto an Excel spreadsheet with grabbing all the data we could get. What's the usage, what's the parcel number, what's the zoning, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is great. You got a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet. You can sort it, but it doesn't really do much from that. So we began to expand on it. So the first thing we did was total up what we have. This is the Western North Carolina Conference. This is you. This is your property as a part of this. 14,600,000 square feet, 2,400 buildings, 7,650 acres of land, about 25% of which are undeveloped. So when you're a trustee and you're taking care of your slice of heaven there, that's a really big portfolio. We are probably one of the largest landholders in the state of North Carolina. And it's a big responsibility, and we need to take it as such. We have then taken that data and started doing something that we can use. We can help you with churches, we can help with districts, we can help with the conference to analyze what your real estate is and what you can do with it. So I'll give you an example. We've taken two programs. One is Power BI and one is ArcGIS. And we've taken that spreadsheet that wasn't doing much for us, and we put it into these programs. This is a program that I can walk in and say, I need to see every property we've got that's within 1.5 miles of a grocery store, 2 miles of a pharmacy, et cetera, and it will sort for us. And in a matter of minutes, I can take that 14 million square feet and I can have the answer to how many properties we have that fit that parameters. So here's an actual usage of it. And this is how, if you want to understand how your church fits into the bigger picture, to build affordable housing in the state of North Carolina, you have to be within a 1 mile driving radius of a grocery store, not just any grocery store. They tell you which chains qualify. So we went out and got the data. The state had asked us to come and talk to them about our database. And so we went out first and got the data. These are the grocery stores. This is a 1 mile driving radius of all those grocery stores, which tells you that the majority of the state is never going to see any tax dollars for affordable housing. So we went to the next level just out of curiosity, and we went to check to see where SNAP retailers were. Of course, everybody knows SNAP is the replacement for food stamps, and SNAP goes where poverty is, and that's a much bigger footprint than the grocery store footprint. So then we came and laid those two layers on top of each other and laid our properties on top to see where the opportunities were. The yellow dots are our properties of Western North County Conference. And so from this, we can make the argument that we either have to change how we allocate the tax credits, or we have to figure out another way to address the rural populations, particularly, that are never going to qualify, because it's not an equitable solution right now. So that's how we can use data. And then, next, Amy. So then on the ArcGIS platform, so this is a program we did this weekend for a geographic footprint of churches that wanted to know how they interface with each other. And so, as you know, we have a lot of churches that are relatively close to each other. I have several churches that if I drive to, my GPS gets confused because they're so close, it's not sure where I'm going. So this is a group of churches that said, let's see where, how this all fits together. This is a 5-minute drive time around each of the churches. So they're all kind of in that same mode, and most of their congregants, about half their congregants are there, 60%. Next. Then we can tell them, what are the needs of our community? What are the needs of the people we're serving? Well, we got mountains of information we can look at. This is the percentage of households with no computer. We're looking at that a lot lately because with COVID and with remote education and remote work, having computer and broadband is important. So these are the congregants overlaid on the census tract of no computers. This is each church could see how far, 5-minute, 10-minute drive time, and this is on a Sunday at 10:30 drive time, how close they were to each other. So what it does is it helps them, like I said, it helps them understand how they interrelate with each other and how they can work together and what the opportunities might be to work together. Next one, Amy. And this is the most interesting one. So each church has its own color, and as they dug deep into this, they realized that 2 or 3 or 4 of them were all pulling from the same neighborhoods. So should we have ways to better cooperate, maybe, so that we're not can we strengthen ourselves by working together versus working in silos is the question. This is the kind of data, the kind of information we can generate for you as you may desire. So just a couple of case studies of what has happened currently. So this is Plaza, Cole Memorial, and the Place. So this was Plaza. Now, if you look on the right-hand side, the picture of the bricks that are kind of protruding out. Remember we talked about water? So there's metal lintels above the window wells to carry the load. And when the water intrudes into that wall enough, that metal will begin to rust. And we all know that when metal rusts, it expands. And when it expands, pushes the brick out. So this is a sign that there's been water going into these walls for a very, very long time. We did a deep look into this building and did not determine that the cost to rehab it would be beneficial. So we ended up selling that property, but we got a new home. This is the former Cole Memorial, which any of you are familiar with Charlotte, is at Mineral Springs and Sugar Creek Road. This church was closed. It's a 4.716 acre property. It's on a prominent corner at Mineral Springs is now the main connector between Uptown and the university. And this is what we're going to do with it. We're going to, the building on the bottom on your right-hand side drawing is a 63 unit senior housing project, which we've been awarded the tax credits for, and the city of Charlotte also awarded us $803,000 to build. The building in the center is going to be a new church, and it's going to be the church that was at the plaza. So it's going to look different. We're not going to build a church that looks the same. But what we're playing with right now because of COVID is a building that has the common room, the sanctuary with chairs, not pews, a stage in the middle with a back wall that opens, and a plaza on the other side. So we want to do outdoor worship. We just open the back wall, turn everybody around, and you're worshiping outdoors. Don't have to build two spaces. You don't have to replicate a lot of expenses. And then the last building will be a commercial building that will help generate revenue to pay for all this. So again, the idea is that we can find ways to support our churches other than just the plates. And this is an exciting community, marrying the church with these folks. This may be something that church may look like. These are the kind of spaces that we're seeing churches navigate towards. This is the same room being used for a dinner, for worship, and for an event show. So the sanctuary is not only being used 2 hours a week and then we shut the doors for the rest of the week. This building is being used over and over. Calvary in Asheboro. So this was a church that was closed that when I went to walk it, I knew from working with some other folks in Asheboro that there was a need for a women and children's shelter. There's not one in the county, not one in the area. And so we're marrying this church with another church in Asheboro, First Asheboro, and they're creating a new church start, a new ministry in this building, which will be a women and children's shelter, as well as empowerment for them, education, empowerment for the children, transitional housing before they move on to market rate. It's been a great combination of many churches, many government partners, many partners in the community to make this happen. And this is the church building on the back, and the fellowship hall and the building in the front will be a more transitional, longer term stay before they move to the market rate. Selwyn and Grace. These are two churches in Charlotte that came together and had conversations and realized that they were probably within a mile and a half of each other, and that they were both struggling, and that perhaps they could be stronger if they came together. And so as they went through that merger conversation, the next question was, okay, now we have two campuses. What are we going to do? So the Selwyn campus, which is the one on the top, is now in the process of moving into a redevelopment, which we put together with some private equity. The church is staying in the transaction. They'll get the value of their land back, as well as a high percentage of the profits of the development. Okay. And the result is that campus will be developed into townhomes. That revenue then will go to the Grace campus where the church is at, and that campus will be redeveloped with residential, retail, new church. So the church is now embedded in the community. You know, if I went to go see my preacher, I go to Starbucks before COVID, or the one before that, I'd go to Panera. Well, why not bring Panera and Starbucks onto our campus? Why not put churches in the community where those places are? And that way we see each other 7 days a week. Last one is Park Street. Park Street, we've been working with for a couple of years, and we took that they have a large site. They did not do, there is an unwritten commandment that the trustees have not heard yet, is thou shalt build thy building in the center of the piece of property where it's the least efficient. They didn't at least do that. They bought buildings off the side, but they have a large piece of property that what the church is saying to the road is it's all parking lot. It's all asphalt. So we took them to a charrette about rethinking their campus and how could it be reactivated to the community. What came up is that they really wanted senior housing. They wanted some retail. They wanted their church building, and the church building may actually be a partner with the arts community in Belmont. So from this schematic, we began working on what actually would happen, Amy, and are now in conversations. This would be the first component. So the L shape on the far right is the senior housing component. Don't have to take anything else down with the church, and we can phase this and step it as that campus begins to redevelop, begins to reconnect to the community. So again, I mean, our buildings are often in the way of our new styles of worship. You know, our small rooms aren't helpful with COVID. A lot of our small rooms used to be classrooms, and now they're empty. You can redo rooms. You can take walls out. You can do things that are interesting with the buildings you have to engage your campus with your community. 12% usage is probably gracious. I mean, it is. We have a lot. You know, people tell us, "Well, we're always full." You're full on Sunday night, and Wednesday night when you're there. Come by Tuesday at 3, or come by Thursday at 4. We have empty space. We have space the community needs. And I think the next 5 years we will see significant changes in how our campuses are used. We're aging, and giving is changing. The new generation gives differently. So we've got to be creative about how we address our campuses, and that's your job. So welcome. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Joel, and thank you for your expertise and the expertise of all your staff, as you not only have helped us in the conference, but you help the local churches throughout the conference to begin to envision some new and different ways of using their property. Want to touch a little bit on COVID. I know you probably are tired of hearing about COVID, but just as trustees, this is in your portfolio, because as your stewards of your property and of your buildings, that it's important to make sure that they're safe places if and when your church decides to have in-person worship. And so the thing that we've been saying for the last 9 months, I know last March when we first experienced it, we thought we would be saying it for a couple of months, but I think it's even going to last longer than, I know it's going to last longer than any of us expect, but our driving value has been to do no harm and to love your neighbor. And so that means we as churches make some difficult decisions, that sometimes we have to give up our own preferences and our own comforts and what we really would want to do in order that we can prevent the spread of COVID, in order that we can keep our neighbors safe, in order that we do no harm. And so I hope that as trustees, that will be your priority as well. We've said it over and over again, but that each church should have a safety or a transition team that's making decisions regarding worship and study and ministry during the pandemic, that's working alongside the pastor. If your church doesn't have one of these yet, as trustees, take the authority to start one. It's very important to have a group of people that are thinking specifically about the pandemic and how we can safely return to our church buildings and continue to to be with them safely as the vaccine moves further and further out into our midst. The state says it, the nation says it, and I think the church needs to continue to say it, and that is that we cannot stop washing our hands, wearing our masks, and allowing 6 feet of social distance between each other. Those are the things that have proven to prevent the spread of this virus. And so I think that needs to be the hallmark of our church's response to what we do, that wherever we are, there are places where we can wash our hands and can use hand sanitizer, that we all wear our masks, and we do that gladly because we know that that protects others and it helps us to love our neighbors, and that they're willing to separate, to socially distance. So again, we don't transmit the virus to each other. I can tell you that I look forward to the day when we can gather in a group of more than 10 and give hugs and handshakes and sing and all of that. But for right now, I don't think that those are things that are safe to do. So I think we have to be willing to kind of give up those comforts in order that we can put an end to this pandemic. The other thing that the trustees can do is can extend hospitality during funerals and weddings. About 2 weeks ago, I got an email from a local church trustee who asked me the question, should we close our bathrooms during a funeral that we're having in our church? And I paused and I thought, and I responded back and I said, please don't. Please just have somebody there that can go in and clean between each person using it. Can you imagine somebody driving for an hour and a half to pay respects and celebrate the life of a loved one or a dear friend or someone for whom they cared, who then arrived at the church building and they couldn't use the bathroom? And so I think now we know what we need to do. And so we need to extend that kind of hospitality, particularly in situations where our neighbors are coming into our church buildings in limited numbers. Please know the statistics in your area. The last time I checked the statistics for the state of North Carolina, all but 3 of our counties were in orange or red, which talked about the spread of the virus and the capacity of the hospitals and the capacity that the hospitals have to care for the sick. And when our counties get into the red, we need to take note of that, and we need to do the things that we can do to stop that spread. That may mean returning to virtual worship for a time until things calm down and until things are back under control, and then we can again slowly but surely begin to invite people into our buildings. Please train laity to serve. Please train laity to take temperatures and to be able to invite people to sign in so that there can be contact tracing. Help laity to be able to know what needs to happen in order to sanitize the building between events or between services, to quickly clean the bathroom so that they can be used safely. This is a way that we can all be members in ministry as we take the time, as the trustees take the time to train the laity to help our buildings be safe and our meetings be safe. And then finally, as we move, continue to move through the pandemic, and hopefully as we move to that time where the pandemic is not spreading, is that we realize that we are never going to return back to normal, or at least the way it was last February. Rather, what we need to do is take a both and approach rather than an either or approach. There are going to be people that are not going to be comfortable gathering together in crowds for a long time. And so as a church, we need to provide for both virtual worship and we need to provide for indoor worship so that people can choose what's right for them in order to do that. So as trustees, that may mean that you need to help make some modifications to your sanctuary and maybe beef up your sound system and install a video projector and a video camera so that virtual worship can be done well. One of the things that I get real frustrated is when I get a call here at the office that fusses at me, the person fusses at me because they said that their church is tired of being closed. Well, friends, the church isn't closed. Our buildings may have been closed for a while and may even need to be closed again. But the church has continued to be active as we found new ways to worship together. As we found new ways to engage with our community outdoors and through feeding them and providing what they needed. So the church is still open. We just had to learn to be flexible, to be creative, to be nimble in order to be the church that God is calling us to be at this time and at this place. So now with that huge overview, let me give you a few questions as you begin your year of trustee meetings that you might want to ask each other and make sure you know the answers to. The first question is, where are the deeds to all the property? Do you have a safety deposit box where they're kept? Who has the key to that safety deposit box? Do you know where they are? Having them in someone's own home is maybe not the safest, because who knows what might happen to them. So where are the deeds, the original deeds to all the property? Do the property titles need to be updated because of mergers or incorporations? As David Hockett shared, I have the privilege of working with our conference trustees. And one of the things that we find as we work with local churches is sometimes the church merged with another church 50 years ago, and no one ever took the time to deed the new property into the name of the new merged church entity. Or perhaps, as I said before, the church incorporated, but no one took the time to redeed the property into the name of the corporation. Take some time to make sure that that's happened. It will save lots and lots of time and heartache and trouble later if you make sure that that's all up to date. If your church is incorporated, where are the articles of incorporation? Where's the corporation minutes book? Is it being kept up to date? This is just a small one, but an important one. Ask yourselves, when was the last time that the fire extinguishers were serviced? In some of our smaller churches, we often do that, is we buy a new fire extinguisher as it's needed, and other churches have services that come in and check them. But oftentimes, I've gone to serve a church and asked the trustees that, and go look around, and nobody's touched that fire extinguisher for 10 years. And it just worries me a little bit that when we need it, it might not be useful. So be sure to check, when was the last time that fire extinguisher was serviced? As we talked about as one of your responsibilities for keeping the building safe, another important thing to look for is your safe sanctuary policy. A safe sanctuary policy is a policy that each local church in the Western North Carolina Conference is supposed to have that protects children, youth, and vulnerable adults. It's a series of guidelines that we agree to as a church, so we can assure those who come and take part in our ministries that we'll provide the safest environment that we can for the people that come and are a part of that. Is that safe sanctuary policy posted anywhere? And is it being enforced? If it says that there's going to be someone that wanders through the halls during Sunday school, is that person doing that just to check sure and make sure everything's okay? If that policy says that there's going to be a yearly CPR training, have you done that? Have you had that training, or a yearly first aid training? If that policy says you'll do background checks on all those who work with children and youth, are those background checks being completed, and are they being kept in a safe and a confidential location? Are they being repeated every 5 years just so that you can make sure that they're up to date? That's one of the things that you as a trustees group are responsible for, to make sure that those safe sanctuary policies are being enforced. Are there building use policies that have been approved by the charge conference? You know, as people transition through the Board of Trustees and serve their 3 years and then rotate off, sometimes some of that historical knowledge can become forgotten. So it's always good to ask, okay, where are our building use policies? And especially now that we have experienced a pandemic and know some new things that need to be done, do we need to update those building use policies so everybody's clear, and so we can keep our buildings safe and well maintained? And then finally, are the trustees reviewing the insurance policies annually? Are you comparing them against the minimum insurance requirements and making sure that you feel comfortable about the amount of insurance that your church has to protect it, not only in the event of a fire or another thing that destroyed your church property, but also in liability issues if someone hurt themselves on the playground or slipped on a sidewalk, or in the terrible event that there was sexual misconduct on the property. Are you prepared in a society that's very litigious, that loves to sue each other and they sue everybody they can? Are you secure that that your church is protected? And that's just the beginning. There are lots of other questions you can ask, but that'll provide you a foundation so that you know what you need to know in order to do your work. Now, before we go to a time of questions, I do want to mention 3 places where you can get some resources for your work. Discipleship Ministries has one-page sheets that talk about the responsibilities of the trustees, and you can download those and print them out and hand them out to all your trustees so that they can have them. Our General Counsel on Finance and Administration, we call it GCF&A for short, has lots and lots of resources for trustees. It has your annual report that you'll give. It talks about legal matters. It talks about insurance. So if you go to the Finance and Administration section of the GCF&A website, you can find lots and lots of resources that will help you. And finally, I encourage all of you to either download as an ebook or get from Cokesbury the guidelines for leading your congregation trustees. This will give you also some specifics on what you're called to do. And these guidelines are updated regularly. So be sure you get the most updated version so that you have that and so that you know how to do your work. Having that and the Book of Discipline and your Bible are all good and important things to have as you work together as a board in service to your church. So I'm going to stop the PowerPoint right now and go back to where I can see most of you, or at least some of you. And I'm going to kind of scan through the chat. David, have you seen any questions that we need to answer? If you have a question, you can put it in the chat or wave your hand and we'll invite you to unmute and ask the question. But I'll start, see, David, if we have any questions.
There were a few, and I think we've answered most of them.
Okay.
No one asked to follow up. So it looks like from the chat anyway, most questions have been asked and answered, although there may be folks may be waiting for this period of time to ask. So please do. Now's your chance.
Amy and David, this is Rod Ingram. If your church is incorporated, but the articles of incorporation cannot be found, where would you go to get a new copy of these articles of incorporation?
So you'd go to the North Carolina Corporation website and you can download them. From there, you would search for your church's incorporation, and usually if they were turned in to the state of North Carolina, then that's where you would find them. You also can maybe see if people remember who the lawyer was that helped you draft those articles of incorporation, and they may have a copy of them as well. But I would first go to the state of North Carolina and search their records. That's how I've found them a lot for churches when I've needed them.
Thank you.
Other questions?
It's Coley, Amy.
Hi, Coley.
Hey, did sometime back the conference give the church council the authority to act as the charge conference?
So in our Book of Discipline, our church council or our administrative council makes up the charge conference. It's called a charge conference when it's a meeting that's officially called by the district superintendent, district superintendent, and it's presided over by the district superintendent or by a designee by the district superintendent. And that's our official, the church conference is our official meeting time. And so that happens yearly as we review the year and celebrate what's happened as well as look to the future. But it also can be called in special sessions if they're property matters, or if you need to take a look at something in the budget or elect a new trustee, then you can have also a special session of the charge conference. It's made up of the same people, but when it's a charge conference, it's called into session in an official way, and actually made up of the same people plus any retired ministers that have their membership, annual conference membership at your church, makes that the full body of the charge conference. So it wasn't us, that's the way the discipline is stated it.
Mhm.
David.
I got a question in regards to life safety or security. Does that fall under the trustees as well?
Safety and security, yes.
Okay.
And as far as like having a plan if there was an active intruder, or is that what you're asking when you think of safety and security?
Well, just implementations of different policies and procedures within the church to make sure you provide the best possible safety that you can for all the people in the congregation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That would be a function of the church trustees.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We'll go to my other screen. Any others that have questions? Oh, here's a fun one. Suppose the church is sued due to COVID-19. Who is responsible? I wish I had invited our conference chancellor on this, but what I can share is as I've consulted with him about this issue is that for a while, when we were in a state of emergency, the state of North Carolina had done the nice thing of allowing entities like churches not to be sued for things like COVID. But you know, what they would have to prove if your church was going to be sued for COVID is gross negligence. Did you not follow any policies that had been recommended by the annual conference or by the state of North Carolina? Did you refuse to wear masks? Did you engage in singing of a full congregation and a full choir when it had been shared with you that that was a way that the virus could spread? So as long as you're taking necessary precautions and as long as you're documenting what you're doing, then from Greg's perspective, that reduces your risk. Will it prevent you from getting sued? Probably not. I mean, not everybody's going to be sued, but I can't tell you what'll absolutely prevent you from getting sued, because people like to sue for lots of reasons. But the ways to make sure that you're the safest are to follow the guidelines. To do the conferences continue to put those out. The state of North Carolina has continued to put those out, and I think we just have to, if we follow the do no harm and love our neighbors, I think we'll have a good case with anybody that would sue us. As far as that, we've been trying to keep people as safe as possible. And what will happen is if they're sued, they'll sometimes sue the church, sometimes they'll sue the church and the board of trustees. It just depends. Unfortunately, I think there's some lawyers that make a living out of targeting churches, sadly. And so that's one of the reasons we emphasize insurance and other things so much, is because we want to protect you from having to have that energy diverted by dealing with something like that when you could be about mission and ministry, which is certainly what you want to be a part of.
Hi, Amy. This is Rick Nelson again. To David's point on safety, I just thought I'd mention in Huntersville, we had the Huntersville Police Department come and do active shooter training with our safety committee.
Okay.
And it was well worth the time. They kind of reviewed what our safety measures are currently, or what they were then, and what recommendations they would make. And then they have it's a course that you go through for active shooter training.
Thanks, Rick. And I totally agree. And I think this is something that if you're in an area or in a missional network, that your missional network could gather a group of churches together and invite the local police department or the local sheriff's department to come and to do that training, to help you know what to do and to help you develop that plan so that you can keep people safe. I was really disheartened and certainly very, very sad when I heard about the situation in the church in Texas, where the intruder was there and had been hiding in the church overnight. And the pastor confronted that intruder, and the pastor was carrying a gun, and the intruder was able to wrestle the gun away from the pastor and kill the pastor. And so it leads me to believe that that probably isn't the best solution. So let's use those folks that are the authorities on it and that can help us know what best to do in order to keep our people safe. So they can provide that information. We also have a section on the conference website. Our insurance company here at the conference office, Church Mutual, has provided some resources that you all can look at for free to see what else you might want to do.
Yep, it's eye-opening, and you know, in the world of everybody having concealed carry permits these days, they can tell you the do's and the don'ts, and then again, like Amy mentioned, the insurance, the way they look at that as well. So that it's well worth looking into.
Thanks.
Amy, did you see Jacqueline's question about if you have water coming into the building? This one may be for Joel, and you can't locate the source.
Yeah, and it is it's almost like a forensic experiment, because water is not necessarily going to come straight down. It's going to hit the nearest beam or whatever and run down. So you start with the logical roof. You look heavily at the flashings, especially around steeples or around any appendage coming out of the roof. It doesn't have to be coming from the outside. If you have a condensate line coming from an air conditioning unit, those lines over the course of a summer can drop 16 gallons an hour. So it could be a condensate line, it could be a water line. All it takes is a small prick in that line to make it leak. So it's kind of like doing a math problem. You start with the first place you think it is, and you work backwards from there.
Thanks, Joel. Well, if there are no other questions, I want to thank you for giving your time tonight. But even more importantly, I want to thank you for the time that you give to your local church and serving as a trustee, for the care that you provide to your building so that God can use that as a tool to reach others with the good news of Jesus Christ. I want you to know that your district offices are good resources, and we here at the conference office, as well as Joel at Wesley CD, are all here to help you in any way that we can. So as you have questions that come up, we are more than happy to answer them or to find somebody that can answer them. And so hope that you will be willing and will feel like that you can give us a call at any time or shoot us an email, and we'll be glad to help. But as we close, David, can I ask you, can I ask you to close us in prayer?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Thanks, Amy. And thank you, Joel. Thank you all for being here this evening. Let us pray. God, we give you thanks for the gift of this day. It's been a full one. We're grateful for all the ways that you've enabled us to be a part of the work of your church, for our baptism and the calling you have on our lives to serve you and to serve others in your communities. Pour out your blessing on these, your faithful servants. Help them to have wisdom, energy, joy in their work, that we may steward well the resources of your kingdom, so that others might come to know of your great love. For the sake of Christ, we pray. Amen.